Alrighty, welcome back to another thrilling installment of Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fragath, and pilot. And today we're going to keep reading from the Mobile Suit Gundam Novelizations. We are in Book 2, entitled Escalation. And wow, we've already done a lot. A lot has happened. I am missing my other bookmark. Where did it go? Oh dear. Well, we'll figure it out. So, Amuro got saved. He escaped in an escape pod, as one does, except the escape pod was his core fighter, which had the combat computer and all sorts of other stuff that would have made it pretty clear that he was a mobile suit pilot from the Federation. Possibly a non-standard one, since I guess gyms don't have, in this continuity, well, they don't in the original either. They don't have core fighters as their cockpit. At any rate, so Amuro gets saved, namely by a girl named Kusko Al, who is mysterious. And then they go to Side 6, which is theoretically Space Switzerland. In reality, it's Side 6 or Side 7? It is Side 6, right? Give me a sec. Yes, Side 6. Unfortunately, Side 6 is somewhat less than neutral. Its sympathies right now lean towards Zeon. This will change, maybe, depending on how circumstances warrant. Oh, geez, one sec. Sorry about that. I don't think I muted in time. So Kusko Al, it turns out, this nice young lady who has met Amuro and clearly is attracted to him in some way, has also already been spurned by him because Amuro, let's face it, is kind of a dink. Also, it turns out she's been going to the Flanagan Institute, which is a Zeon outfit intended to find candidates for their Newtype combat corps for making a group of Newtype combatants in the war. This is, you know, sort of shady and suspicious. All right. How long is that chunk gonna be, though? I can divvy that up. I can make that work. Sorry, I'm trying to talk by memory as well as do two things at once, and I am bad at both. Okay. Yeah, that'll do it. We'll basically have 3 more segments, including today. I think that'll work out pretty well. With a couple chapters each for this book, and then we have the next one to look forward to, which is pretty long. The 3rd volume. Ah, there it is. I knew I had another bookmark type object here. Making my book twice as bulky with bookmark volume alone. Good times. Good times. All right. So, for further details, I advise watching or listening rather, to the previous segments. Because I'm a little distracted right now. So, yeah, things have been moving along. Things are, anyone who's actually seen the original series, things are quite different at this point. Um, Mostly because Lala showed up and then was removed from the plot in record time. Um, let's hope the same fate doesn't befall Kusko Al, right? Don't worry, she lasts a bit longer. She lasts longer, don't worry. Y'all are so pessimistic. I didn't say how much longer. Tomino is renowned, infamous for uh, killing large swaths of the cast off in a certain time period of his creative body of work. Um, he's a lot less like that now, but he's also doing a lot less now. It's one of the things that separated him from the entire rest of the anime producing workforce, really, is he was like, yeah, nah, all these people, they dead. What do you mean? Oh, they all died. What do you mean they all died? How did you kill them all? Well, turns out Ideon said, nah, this is enough human suffering for this current cycle of the wheel. We're annihilating the universe. Don't worry, their spirits will be fine. Everybody's body, though, dead. Space Runaway Ideon is a trip. It is a trip. It's quite good a trip. It's a quite good trip. But man, you have to be pretty ready for Tomino. Like, I would advise getting some other Tomino series under your belt before you watch that one, because it is a doozy. There's a lot going on there. And yet it's one of the ones, the first I'm likely to recommend. Odd that. All right, so yeah, Amuro basically straight up ditched her, drove away from her, kicked her out of the car and drove away. It was like, nope, sorry, you're playing with me. I don't want to be played with. I want you to treat me differently than you're treating me. And she's like, excuse me? And he's like, I don't have to put up with this abuse. I'm ditching you. I already have a girlfriend. And Kusko Al is just like, as he's driving off. Amuro's kind of a he's bad at communicating for someone who is a burgeoning Newtype with the empathic communicative powers thereof. He's not great with people, which is what makes him very human. All right, so I've rambled inanely and disjointedly for about too long now, so let's get cracking. Um, and I will become more focused, I promised. I promise. I promise. Sorry about that. Let's try that again so it's actually audible. My bad. Chapter 11 Prelude. After the Federation forces took over Granada and named it FS for First Step, they were careful to deploy only enough forces to secure it as a beachhead. The former Zeon base was located at the southernmost tip of the Soviet mountain range on the far side of the moon, and was thus directly exposed to Zeon's Abo-Aku space fortress. The Federation continued to keep its main forces on the other side of the moon, the side facing Earth, at a base codenamed LH for Look Home. The Trichigan, a Salamis-class cruiser, slowly descended to the number 6 deck on the LH. A standard Earth Federation warship, its basic shape conformed to that of the floating vessels that had once plied Earth's seas, yet because it was designed for a weightless environment, it had sub-bridges protruding from both port and starboard sides that could also be used as decks. Warships only needed true bottoms for docking and coming alongside space piers. Ensign Amuro Ray stood and watched from the bridge. After leaving Balda Bay on a civilian transport flying the Earth Federation flag, the Trichigan had come alongside specifically to take him on board. And for the duration of the flight, he had been assigned a private room with a chief petty officer 10 years his senior to care for him. It was VIP treatment normally only extended to senior officers, and it should have made him feel at home, but it didn't. Like many combat-seasoned lower-ranking officers, Amuro had a rebellious streak in him, and it tended to manifest itself in the regular military hierarchy. He quickly became suspicious of his assigned aide, who followed him around like a shadow and liked to proclaim, "I'm under strict orders to take good care of you, sir!" From Amuro's perspective, the man's expression really said the opposite, that if he, Amuro, so much as tried to leave his prison, he would have his teeth knocked out. Amuro knew that Lieutenant List, in accordance with his duty, had probably filed a report on his meeting with Kusko Al in front of the Flanagan Institute. Sorry. Given that he and Kusko Al had separated so soon after meeting, he also hardly knew anyone would believe he had only gone there in an attempt to date her. It would definitely look like he had been furtively meeting her to exchange information. He knew he could never explain it, but at the same time he hoped it would be overlooked. He had been picked up by the Trichigan and was now docking at LH because he had General Revel's special protection. And the Federation military, he suspected, now had far more pressing matters at hand than his encounter with Kusko Al. On the bridge, at least, the officers and crew treated him normally, but he nonetheless got the feeling that everyone, from the ship's captain on down, was keeping him at a distance. Perhaps they did not suspect him. Perhaps, since he was only with them for the duration of the voyage and unlikely to be assigned permanently to their ship, they had merely decided not to waste their energy in befriending him. The Trichigan bridge communicated with the LH control tower one last time on docking procedure, and then a giant hatch opened over a huge shaft leading from the fortress's ground level to the underground decks of its port. The shaft extended over a kilometer deep into the moon's surface and could hold up to 8 Salamis-class ships. Descending all the way required passing through 3 different hatches. As a frontline base, the area was poorly maintained and often had unsecured materials that easily floated free. As scrap metal bounced off the bridge, someone yelled, "What's the matter with this place? Don't they have any gravity on the moon?" If Kusko Al were really a Newtype, it occurred to Amuro, he probably would never see her again. In fact, if they were both sent into combat, the odds that they would meet again in the vast theater in which the war was being played out were surely less than 1 in a million. But if that were the case, he wondered why he hadn't spent more time talking with her the night before. Why had he suddenly become so angry? "I just hope I don't meet her the way I did Lala soon," he thought, regretting his impetuousness all the more. Just when he was deciding it was all Kusko's fault, his eyes widened. The LH docking pier below seemed to rise up to meet them. Oh, sorry, jeez Louise. The LH docking pier below seemed to rise up to meet them, and the Trichigan quickly decelerated to reach its assigned mooring spot. There were people in civilian clothes on the pier rushing about in preparation for the landing, and several military helicars zipping in and among them. Amuro instantly forgot about Kusko Al. "Hey, look!" he excitedly exclaimed to anyone in earshot. "I'll be damned! My crewmates are there! There's Bright, my old skipper who's always flying off the handle, and Mirai, the ensign with the maternal instinct, and Kai Shiden. And look there, that's Hayato. They've all come to meet me. Hey, and there's Chief Petty Officer Marker, and Oscar, and that big heavy set man. That's Slegger Law, the gunnery officer, and Ensign Ram Dowai, the engineer with the big laugh. And wait a minute, that pretty blonde. That's Petty Officer Selah Mass. 2 weeks had elapsed since the destruction of Texas, and during that time Amuro had assumed that most of his friends had been killed. Now, seeing so many of them alive, he felt as though an enormous burden had been lifted from his spirit. So many had survived. But one memory suddenly moved into his mind like a dark cloud on a sunny day. Ryu. Ryu wasn't there. Ryu, who had begun pilot training at the same time as he had, but been destroyed in a mobile suit battle. If only Ryu were there to meet him too. When the Trichigan finally docked, the ship's captain turned to Amuro and said, "Congratulations on a job well done, Ensign. We look forward to hearing about your further success in the new 127th Autonomous Squadron." "The 127th?" Amuro queried. The skipper grinned and said, "Well, it's just a rumor, but we hear it's an elite combat unit, hand-picked from the Federation forces. If General Revel thought enough of you to have us give you VIP treatment, I'm sure you're among the pilots selected. And I'm sure you'll perform superbly, Ensign." "Thanks, sir," he answered, resisting the impulse to tell the man that he also knew the negative implications of any such assignment. He shook the captain's hand, feeling terribly adult about the whole matter, and said, "Here's wishing the Trichigan good hunting, sir." Then, as soon as he disembarked onto the pier, Amuro heard a familiar voice cry out, "Way to go, Amuro! Our star pilot! We knew you'd make it! Now tell us you're surprised to see us alive!" It was his old comrade, Kai Shiden. Amuro laughed. "Surprised? Hey, I'm amazed! Especially to see you!" he said. The crowd on the pier burst into laughter at the good-natured exchange, and he felt himself drawn into the mood of the moment. The informality of it all was perfect, and nothing could have pleased him more. He was reunited with his friends, with his old crewmates, and filled with a profound sense of relief. It was almost like being reunited with a family. "Good job, Ensign," said Bright, his skipper. "A lot of cheers went up around here when we got word that you'd made it to Side 6 alive. We've been waiting for you a long time." Amuro looked around at everyone again and again, still not completely believing his eyes. And then he caught sight of a familiar blonde young woman standing behind Petty Officer First Class Howard. He smiled briefly, and she smiled back. Her mouth seemed to form the words, "Welcome home, Amuro," but she was drowned out by the rest of the crowd. "General Revel's waiting to see you," Bright announced, letting Amuro know he wasn't supposed to dawdle too long. There would be time to socialize later. Mirai began hustling everyone toward 4 Elicars standing by. Amuro noticed a new, confident air about her and wondered if it could be simply a result of having survived the ordeal on Texas. Selah jumped in Kai's Elicar behind Hayato. Ramdoi, sitting next to Mirai in the back of Bright's Elicar, yelled out for Amuro to join them, and he eagerly jumped in the front. It was hard to contain his enthusiasm. "Yahoo! Step on it!" he yelled gleefully. First Kai and then Bright accelerated forward, and the others followed. The engines of the huge moored Trichigan slowly shut down. When the boisterous former crew of the Pegasus left the giant domed underground port, the entire area was finally enveloped in silence. Along the way, Amuro's crewmates began to fill him in on what had transpired in his absence. "I'm sure you know," Bright said, "that the 13th Autonomous was completely successful in its feint maneuver. Despite losing our ship, we managed to lure several of Caecilia's ships out into the open, and that helped the main force achieve a total victory in Operation Star One. Goes without saying, of course, we wouldn't be here on this moon base if we hadn't won. All in all, things don't seem to be going well for the Zeon side." "Think they're having some sort of internal power struggle, sir?" "You could say that. Relations between the Zabi family members seem a little strained, to say the least." "Really?" "It's just a rumor, Amuro," Mirai added from behind him, "but people say there's a power struggle going on between Girin, Caecilia, and Dozel, the three surviving Zabi siblings." "By the way, Mirai," Amuro suddenly turned and asked her, teasingly, "did you gain some weight?" "Me?" She gasped and covered her cheeks with her hands, her small round eyes practically popping out of her head. Well, I guess I have put on a kilogram or two in the last 10 days." "I'll bet the military hasn't been giving you guys enough to do, that's what," Amuro said with a grin. "The Force is famous for poor horizontal communication in the ranks, right? They've probably forgotten all about you folks." "Sorry to disappoint you, Amuro, but things have been so busy here on LH recently, you'd probably wish you were off fighting instead." "And that, kiddo," Bright injected with a mischievous grin, "is why everyone really wanted to see you. They figured they could get out of a day's work." Amuro was puzzled. Bright seemed to have matured by at least 10 years. Was his extra confidence simply that of a survivor? "To tell you the truth," he said, "you all seem different to me somehow." "Different?" "Different. Maybe this is a weird thing to say, but everyone seems to be getting along so well now, almost like a family. I never sensed that before. Even Sayla, the one everyone used to tease and call the bungler, seems to be doing great." "Maybe you're right," Mirai said. "Maybe it has something to do with having survived Texas. As for Sayla, some of us did used to feel she was different, but and didn't really fit in. But it turns out she's the one who helped us all escape Texas. She's the one who showed us the way out of the colony before it exploded. It was like there was a mysterious voice leading her that none of the rest of us could hear." Bright interjected. "You mean she might be some sort of a new type, right?"
"Well, maybe not as much as Amuro. Say, not to change the subject, but look at Kai and Hayato in the other Elixir, both jockeying for her attention."
"I'd say that's proof she's finally been accepted," Ramdo-I said, seated next to Mirai. "Amuro," Bright asked, "you're from the same side as Sailor, aren't you?"
"Yes, sir. Side 7."
When Amuro's Elixir finally arrived at LH Operations Center, the other three vehicles were already waiting. Instead of getting out, their riders called out,
Go to it, Amuro!
"Good luck!"
See you back at the Pegasus!
and then took off again. Sayla smiled and waved, and, after having seen the way both Kai and Hayato had acted around her, there was something reassuring to Amuro about that. Amuro and Bright got out of their Elixir, and Mirai took the wheel.
"I'll see you both later," she said. "We're going to have a little celebration afterward on the Pegasus. Another excuse to take a break from work."
As they entered the operations center, Amuro turned to Bright and asked,
"Did I hear right, Skipper? Did she say Pegasus?"
"She did, but it's really the Pegasus II. Turns out the Federation fleet had a second White Base-class warship, and we've all been reassigned to it. We're apparently going to form the core of the 127th Squadron." Amuro fell silent for a second, realizing that he was the only one who had absolutely no idea of what was going on. Then he asked,
"We're shipping out again soon?"
"We sure are," Bright replied. "Time's apparently running out. Word is that Zeon's cooking up something a lot bigger than a little skirmish on the other side of the moon." Inside operations, General Revel took a puff on his cigar and let his eyes follow the trail of smoke.
I'm speaking to you, Ensign Amuro Ray, on the assumption that you may be a rare find, a true Newtype, and I expect you to hold what I say in the strictest confidence.
Yes, sir.
Zeon forces have been lying low the last 2 weeks, but there's a reason, and it's not simply because they lost Granada. They're apparently developing a new secret weapon, one with awesome destructive power, and they're stalling for time.
Bright blurted out, "You mean they're going to put a new type unit into action, sir?"
When Revel ignored him, he stepped backward and looked down at the floor sheepishly.
No, I'm talking about a weapon capable of directly hitting the moon from Zeon territory.
A direct strike?
Amuro felt a chill run down his spine. That would be no easy feat. He had never heard of a beam weapon capable of inflicting direct damage from tens of thousands of kilometers away. In theory, a long-range missile might work, but even if it emitted Minovsky particles to confuse local defense radar systems, it would never be able to break through a defense perimeter of contact space mines. It was precisely because of these limitations that current military strategy still dictated the use of battleships for such attacks. Revel laughed at the sound of Amuro's shocked voice.
I'm exaggerating, Ensign. I'm exaggerating.
He shot a glance at Bright, as if to scold the overly young lieutenant for his earlier remark, and then continued.
But not totally. Ever since the end of the 20th century, people have talked of a weapon that could instantly annihilate an entire fleet. Talked of using an entire space colony to create a colossal laser cannon. It's exactly the sort of madness Zeon would seriously consider.
Sir, Amuro said, are you saying Zeon might use one of its sealed cylinder colonies for that?
Exactly.
Bright interjected again.
But wouldn't they have to build a new colony cylinder specifically for the cannon?
Not necessarily. Don't forget, Giran Zabi's an absolute dictator. All he has to do is evacuate the residents of one of Zeon's existing cylinders and then reinforce its structure. It's probably not as difficult an engineering feat as it sounds. We have information they've already begun evacuating one.
Revel said it casually, but Amuro knew the scale of the operation would be mind-boggling. Even compact colonies were now being built to house up to 5 million people. Large ones could hold 10 to 15 million.
I find it hard to believe anyone could carry out an operation of that size so fast, sir, he said, staring at the general.
You'll find it easier to believe when you learn more about the political intrigues the human mind delights in, young man. Don't forget that in the old days, people used to take summer vacations in space. Up to 500,000 people a month used to visit the Texas colony. We're only talking about Zeon mobilizing 10 or 20 times that number. It's not impossible. And by the way, Ensign, to get back to the point your skipper made about Zeon forming a new type fighting unit.
Sir?
That rumor may also be true. It's why we've decided to form one of our own, with you at its core. It's what the 127th Autonomous Squadron's all about. We want you to be in the vanguard.
Me, sir?
Surely you're not surprised. You must have been expecting it. After all, the Zeon mobile armor you destroyed on Texas, the Elmeth, was clearly a weapon developed specifically for new types. I know the general public would have been more impressed if you'd destroyed the Red Comet, but we in the military know what a terribly important service you performed.
Thanks, I guess.
I've made arrangements for your promotion, Ensign, but our staff seems a little bogged down with the paperwork these days, so it might take a while for it to formally come through.
Revel then picked a letter of commission up from his desk and handed it to Amuro, who stood up to receive it. Amuro started to read it aloud to himself from the paper.
"You are herein reassigned to the 127th Autonomous Squadron," when he was interrupted.
That's correct, Revel said. The performance of the Pegasus and its crew under the command of Bright Noah here has convinced me we should take a chance on all of you being potential new types. There's no sense waiting for the desk jockeys at headquarters in Jaburo to understand something like this. They've been working in their underground complex on Earth so long they'd never believe that merely living in the vastness of space could alter human consciousness the way the new type theory postulates.
The general ground out his cigar in an ashtray and stood up.
It's good to see you again, Ensign. I know you won't disappoint me.
Thank you, sir. I'll do my best."
He shook the general's hand, and despite the powerful grip, he could tell the man was tired. It was no wonder.
"The general put his career on the line and fought tooth and nail with the general staff to get us assigned to the Pegasus II," Bright explained as they left the office. "It seems like the Jabro desk jockeys are an even bigger problem than Zeon."
Amuro pondered the meaning of Bright's words. In the distance, Commander Shar Aznable could see Abo Aku, the odd umbrella-like shape of the floating fortress backlit by the rays of the sun. But he was more interested in what was going inside the cockpit of his new model MS. The accelerator pedal, that's misspelled, beneath his right foot, it's spelled pedal like peddling wares. Peddle. It should be Pedal. Yes. Yes, pedal. Accelerator pedal. The accelerator pedal beneath his right foot was divided into 3 main stages, each of which could be precisely modulated. He stomped it to the floor and noted that the entire MS cockpit, including his seat and the control panel, acted as a 360-degree shock absorber, canceling out much of the G-force that would have normally borne down on him. He was delighted. The new model, a Rick Dom, would perform even better than his old Zaku. It was larger in girth, and its armor was twice as strong, but it could turn on a dime. The handheld beam bazooka, moreover, was directly linked to a highly efficient accelerator built into the arm, giving the MS the firepower of the main cannon on a Musai-class cruiser. With this thing, he exulted, I might be able to bag that White Federation suit. Then a voice came over his receiver, so garbled by Minovsky interference that it was nearly unintelligible.
Here comes the target, Commander.
He barked into his mic in verification, and his message was transmitted to the Abo Aku operators by both radio and laser transmission. Several seconds later, when he was able to visually identify the target, he lined up the mono-eye sight of his MS with the bead on the beam bazooka barrel in its right hand. Then he pulled the trigger on the control stick, sending a laser-simulated beam streaking toward the target, and awaited a signal telling him if he had hit home or not. He had complete faith in his aim, and used the intervening seconds to check the 5 Rick Dom suits deployed on either side of him. They had not even sighted the target yet. Suits 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, he yelled. Look above you and to your right, 18 degrees. If this were real combat, you'd all have been pulverized. You've got to do better. Let's run this one more time. How many times had they performed the same maneuver? Shar was beginning to lose faith in his men. In the last 3 or 4 moves executed, they had always been too slow. None were new recruits. All were veterans, survivors from the beginning of the war, and all were skilled marksmen. 4 had even bagged the ultimate prize, Federation battleships. Perhaps, he thought, the difference between himself and them was that he had more Newtype potential. The futility of forming an effective, coordinated combat team with them grated on his nerves. Another target appeared to streak out of the fiery sun, attacking the Rickdom formation in a zigzag maneuver.
and Shar pulled back to see how the others performed. He had to laugh at himself a little for even believing that humans could improve dramatically overnight or suddenly become new types. Perhaps, he thought with a tinge of bitterness, there had only been one real new type, Lala Soon. Then the garbled voice of the operator on Abo Aku said, "An Elmeth will be part of the today's mock combat." "I thought that wasn't in the schedule today," Shar griped.
Her Excellency Cancilia specifically asked to see your team's performance against it, sir.
"Very well," he replied, "but it means we have to stay out here and practice for another 5 minutes." Before he could finish the sentence, he saw the flare of the Elmeth streak through the blackness. "I wonder if the thing's piloted by a human," he thought. If so, no one had informed him. "Formation G!" he yelled out to his men, initiating a defense tactic that had been devised to take on the White Federation MS, the Gundam, on the assumption that its pilot was a new type. It involved deploying the 6 Rickdoms in an enveloping circle over an area 500 kilometers in diameter. It was impossible to get a good look at the Elmeth itself at that distance, but the computers in their suits would put them on a course calculated to bring them into contact, and the rest would be automatic. They would gradually close the noose around the enemy machine and try to sight it as soon as possible visually. That was the theory, at least. 10 seconds later, the Elmeth had slipped through their net and was closing in on one of the Rickdoms, attacking it without the aid of its remote-controlled auxiliary bit units, instead using its twin particle cannon with devastating, though simulated, effect. When the 4th Rickdom in his formation had been destroyed, Shar knew what was happening. "The Elmeth's not on remote! The pilot's real!" he yelled. In the same instant, he spotted the machine streaking above his own line of fire. He slammed his MS into an evasive maneuver and reflexively pulled the trigger on his beam bazooka. The shot was wasted. Then came another attack. He aimed, thought he had the Elmeth in his sights, but it outmaneuvered him and dropped below his field of vision. Shar yelled. He heard the simulated sound of something slamming into his Rickdom and his fuselage cracking. Could he have been hit in the split second his mind was diverted? The readout below his main monitor indicated the left leg of his MS had been shot off. He put his machine into a retreat. As he watched, in the next few seconds the Elmeth polished off the remaining 2 Rickdoms. The Elmeth's smooth skin swept upward in the rear, from the front giving it the rather charming silhouette of a tri-cornered hat, but its performance was far from charming. The Elmeth was deadlier than a humanoid-style mobile suit, and not because of its shape, which had little advantage over old-style space fighters, but because of its new type pilot. "I bet they've found another woman to pilot the damn thing," Shar fumed. He sensed a unique presence emanating from the machine, something female yet unlike that of Lala Soon. Whatever it was, it possessed a defiant, abrasive quality. Could it be Kusko Al, the junior grade lieutenant candidate that Garcia Dowell had mentioned? He feared a repeat of what had happened with Lala. He didn't want to see another woman piloting the Elmeth. The Elmeth floated right in front of his Rickdom, and then suddenly changed course. And sure enough, he caught a glimpse of a woman in a normal suit seated in an illuminated cockpit. He couldn't recognize her, but he knew the unusually large helmet of her normal suit was designed for a new type. "Looks just like the one Lala wore," he bitterly noted. He barked out the order to reform, and the other Rickdoms fell into their conventional flight formation around him. He could see the rear of the Elmeth right in front of him. "Laugh at us if you want," he thought, as he put his MS into second-level combat speed and soared past the Elmeth, his 5 comrades trying hard to keep up. For a second he imagined he heard the Elmeth pilot giggle. But in an instant a trail of light streaked across his main monitor and disappeared into a corner of Abo Aku. It was the Elmeth. "Damn woman," he muttered. And then he heard, or thought he heard, a reply. "I'm not a damn woman. I have a name. Kusko Al.
There was nothing audible. There were no words. A thought had simply slipped into Char's mind.
It's true we're putting a prototype into action, but we're not compromising on performance. We're talking about something fundamentally different from the new gym shoots. Understand?
In the Mobile Suit Development Hangar on the Federation's LH moon base, Amuro listened as Professor Mosk Han lectured him on the latest improvements in MS designs. Mosk was one of the most talented mobile suit engineers in the Federation, but Amuro found that his authoritative, macho demeanor was belied by an almost feminine tendency to overexcitability. He tried to interpret the man's behavior in the best possible light, and write off his outbursts as the product of an overly intellectual orientation to life.
But, Professor, he said, if you use a prototype MS design, I don't see how you'll be able to exploit the strengths of the magnetic coating.
Humph, you're not trained to think, but just to sit in your cockpit and attack the enemy, so I guess it's beyond your comprehension. But the magnetic coating practically eliminates all the mechanical friction normally occurring in the MS powertrain.
You mean it functions sort of like oil?
Oil? Did you say oil, lad?
Amuro realized he had used the wrong word. Oil was an archaic term, and that apparently had raised Mosk's hackles.
Well, he said, I'm trying to understand, sir. I know this prototype Gundam is the third model produced, and that it's been put through a pretty strenuous test period, but as the person who has to pilot the machine, I'd just like to make sure every potential problem is eliminated in advance.
Well, that's clearly impossible. We've painted every single point of physical contact in the powertrain with magnetic coating. The positive and negative fields of the coating repel each other, thereby completely eliminating any mechanical friction. That's the theory. Understand? This is supposed to eliminate mechanical interference, no matter what amount of force is applied.
Amuro wanted to say something, but he held his tongue. He knew that eliminating mechanical friction would also eliminate the natural braking effect that it could provide. Hello. And although the new MS body should be able to withstand almost any degree of stress, even when its engine ran into the red zone, he knew it still wouldn't have the speed or agility of movement that he really wanted.
But we still haven't solved the power problem, have we? He ventured.
Of course not. What do you think I am? An engine specialist? But listen, since the resistance has dropped in the drive chain, the Gundam's actual overall mobility has increased between 120 and 130%. That's almost like installing a new engine that's twice as powerful.
Oh, I see.
Try it out. You'll be pleased. If we improve the MS performance much beyond this point, your body won't be able to keep up. You'll be constantly buffeted by enormous G-forces, and in 4 or 5 minutes your insides would be jello. But I agree, it's an area we've eventually got to address. We've got to find a way to create a cockpit that cancels out the G-forces, or else do something to your body so it can withstand them better.
Oh,
You're a clever lad. Keep me informed of the test results, and when you write up your reports, don't forget I'll be reading them too.
yes, sir.
It was awfully difficult, Amuro realized, to judge people by first impressions. Those who seemed pleasant at first usually were good people. Professor Mosk wasn't particularly pleasant, but the instant Amuro had changed his attitude to one of deference, the man had become so friendly it was uncanny. Perhaps, Amuro thought, it was a characteristic of technologists in the field.
While still pondering the professor's personality, ooh, there's some good alliteration there. While still pondering the professor's personality, Amuro kicked off the hangar deck and sailed up through the low-gravity air to the new Gundam's cockpit hatch. He was relieved that the suit's basic humanoid design hadn't been tampered with, and that, unlike the gym models, it still had two eyes. If the machine was functionally going to reflect the pilot's will, his will, he wanted it to have some sort of expression. It needn't be able to frown or raise its eyebrows like the crude pneumatic-powered Marilyn Monroe humanoid robots popular in shows in the last century. The two eyes were enough to create the emotive quality he wanted. As always, the Gundam cockpit was encased in a cold, steel-like material that felt like coffin walls. He shut the front hatch, whereupon the sound of the idling motor faded, leaving him enveloped in the zen-like nothingness of total darkness. The instrument panel was inactive. Something about the air in the cockpit reminded him that maintenance people had been working on it only a few minutes ago, but it was freshly vacuumed and spotless. The pilot's seat was as hard and uncomfortable as ever, but that was to be expected. Everything was more or less as he was accustomed to from his last MS. The main control levers were on either side of him, and the foot pedals were in their appropriate locations. Even in pitch darkness, he knew exactly where the 28 switches of the control panel were. It was a relief. Switches, levers, pedals. All he had to do was stretch out his arms and legs, and everything was where it was supposed to be. This should do fine, he thought, for the time being at least. He wasn't really sure where the thought, the time being, came from, or what he really meant. Peering around him, he knew it wasn't true, as some people said, that total darkness was frightening. He let his pupils dilate, and still couldn't see a thing. In fact, he could hardly tell if his eyes were open or shut. He looked straight ahead and let himself relax. He listened to and counted his breath. He became more aware of being alive, and felt incredibly peaceful. Then he heard, or sensed, a pinging noise. It was faint, but soon accompanied by what felt like a tiny thread of light streaming out from the center of his brain into the darkness before him, through the hatch of the Gundam cockpit, through the surface of the moon above him, and into the vastness of the surrounding space. The light was sharply defined, but had a warm, reassuring glow to it. Lala? Amuro shifted in his seat. He wanted to see where the light was headed, but it was already gone. It hadn't been a hallucination. He knew it had continued on into the black space before him. But he felt confused. Lala soon. An indescribable aching sensation welled in his body, irritating and then destroying his earlier tranquility. A chill slowly crawled up his spine and spread out through his flesh until the ends of his limbs quivered. Lala soon? Is it Lala soon? Something in his mind nearly screamed the thought. He felt even more anxious and annoyed. What are you trying to tell me? Lala, or whoever you are, what is it? He knew he had to do something. He put his hand on one of the Gundam's control levers and squeezed it. Then he turned the key in the ignition, and through the floor of the cockpit felt the engine groan before fully igniting. When the instrument panel sprang to life, its lights nearly blinded him with their sudden brightness, and instantly banished the entire black universe before him. They had 2 stages of intensity, and when they reached the second, he knew the main engine had fired. With a vroom, the Gundam revealed its inner power. Then he knew a part of the source of his frustration. The machine enveloping him was a weapon. Are Newtypes, he wondered, merely extensions of weapons? Just tools of destruction? Is that what Lala Soon was? Is that what the Red Comet is? Is that all I am? He was flesh and blood, not a machine. He wanted desperately to refute such a repulsive idea and assert a higher purpose in life for himself. But a swirling undercurrent of self-doubt undermined his ability to do so. Newtypes are humans. He pushed the right-hand control lever forward, and the Gundam's right arm rose with a burst of energy, far faster than the old model, with enough force to make the entire MS fuselage recoil. But with that movement, Amuro's own reflexes also came alive, and his limbs began moving the other controls in the small cockpit, working rapidly to keep the Gundam properly balanced. A team of mecha men who had just finished a job in another corner of the hangar turned and stared at the Gundam. It was standing with its back still attached to a maintenance fixture, but its limbs began slicing through the air. One man yelled to his comrades,
Hey, get a load of that, will ya? That shows what magnetic coating can do.
The new Gundam was infinitely more maneuverable than either the original model or the mass-produced gym suits currently in use, and its next maneuver was truly astonishing. Its left arm slowly rose in the air, paused for a few seconds, and then slammed downward, but the body of the machine scarcely twitched, despite having moved off the supporting fixture. By slightly shifting the suit's hips, Amuro had perfectly cancelled the weight of the mass in its arm. To the cheers of the mecha men, he then began moving the Gundam with such speed and grace it looked more like a human boxer than an inorganic machine. In theory, it shouldn't even have been possible. An order then issued from the control room. Number 6 hatches will open shortly. All personnel in hangar area must move to the airlock. The mecha men in the maintenance area ran for cover to the airlock room and clustered around its 1-meter square, blast-proof window, transfixed. The new Gundam began striding forth. Oh, thanks for tuning in, Optical Antenna. I appreciate it. Good morning to you as well. After passing through the double-layered hangar hatches, Amuro entered the vacuum area of the moon base. On the cockpit's displays, he saw a sliver of Earth shining in the distance, surrounded by stars blazing in the heavens. He announced into his mic, Ensign Amuro Ray in G3, ready for launch. Now commencing practice flight. The base flight control officer's voice crackled in his headphones, stating what they both already knew. Take it away, Ensign. Remember, you're going out there to get used to the suit's flight characteristics. Amuro double-checked his radar and laser sensors. Neither would be much good with the high Minovsky concentration in the area, but the lasers could at least act as an identification friend or foe, or IFF, signal. And there was something reassuring about having radar, even if it didn't work. He looked up at the heavens through his main display, double-checking the area in space from which his computer was registering information. Somewhere out there, he knew a space beacon would delineate the practice area for him. Blast off! He said it half to himself, half as a formality to inform the flight officer. He fired the main rockets in the Gundam's backpack, and to his astonishment, the suit soared nearly 10,000 meters in seconds. The new model was far faster than he had expected. The laser accelerator in its nuclear fusion engine had been improved, theoretically yielding only 20 to 30% more power, but when combined with the new magnetic coating on the powertrain, the resulting synergy seemed to have nearly doubled the MS's power and speed. Yet he was still bothered by one thought. If only the armor had been reinforced too. The engineers had improved the machine's performance without improving his personal protection, and there was something disturbing about that. He understood the logic behind the changes made, but he was the pilot and the one whose life was on the line. Perhaps he was asking too much, but he was human. Perhaps, he imagined, it was even something Lala had tried to warn him about earlier. He was sure of one thing. This talk of new types and their future transcended concerns over his personal safety. He knew the leap in consciousness, the sense of prescience he had experienced with Lala Soon, was not limited to them alone. Their special communion had heightened their five senses and expanded the fundamental communication of which all humans are capable. And in the end, it had generated a mysterious compound, universal wisdom. It was an experience, he was convinced, that led beyond personal oblivion. Personal Bolivian. It was an experience, he was convinced, that led beyond personal oblivion. But if Amuro was a potential new type, he was also an ensign in the Federation forces, a military pilot. And military pilots were not supposed to ponder the future of mankind. They were supposed to kill, and survive to kill again. To stay alive and develop as a true new type, he would first have to conquer the vast obstacle unfolding before him, the battlefield of outer space. It seemed like a cruel fate, but whether military pilot or new type, his fundamental emotional makeup was the same. He knew that he would just have to wait and see what happened. The new Gundam Mobile Suit was a deep gray color and therefore harder to visually spot in space, but it had also been designed to be even more invisible to radar. To make sure certain accidents didn't I don't know how to read. Okay. To make certain accidents didn't happen during training flights, the suit had running lights for identification on its shoulders and toes. To Amuro's left and right, the lights streaked through space among the stars. On the bridge of the Pegasus II, Chief Petty Officer Marker Clan suddenly sighted a unique laser oscillation on the computer-generated model displayed on the ceiling and called out, "It's the new Gundam!" The computer system was even less reliable than radar, but it was at least capable of detecting and encoding laser signals.
3 degrees to port. Elevation 36 degrees. Distance 180 kilometers.
Barked Petty Officer Oscar Dublin, perched opposite Marker on the bridge's boom crane. Bright scrambled down from the captain's seat at the base of the crane arm, ordering, "Sailor, open up a radio link. The Gundam's coming in for a test landing on Deck 1. "Gundam, G3," Sayla announced, her eyes intent on the comm panel in front of her. "This is Pegasus 2. Can you read us? Over." She sounded so professional it was hard to believe that she had once been a raw recruit derisively referred to as the bungler. Amuro's voice burbled up through the static.
"This is G3. I read you. My instruments confirm the Pegasus 2.
In a heavy concentration of Minovsky particles, it took a highly trained comm-tech to fully understand what he was saying. "Pegasus to Gundam," Sayla replied. "We have opened the hatch on Deck 1 for you. You are cleared for landing."
"Understood. Landing at third combat speed. Incoming."
Bright turned and nodded at Mirai, standing with her hands on the helm. She switched it to automatic and ran to the bridge window to see the Gundam. "He came into view awfully fast, didn't he?" she said. "That's Amuro for you," Bright replied. "I'll say the ace of the 127th. Pegasus II, the second white base-class Cosmo cruiser in the Federation arsenal, was an assault landing ship, but from certain angles it resembled a giant winged horse. In the vacuum of space, the wings performed no aerodynamic function, but instead acted as heat dissipation panels and helped the ship's solar energy cells and many of its vernier jets. The wings were so huge that on Earth the ship would have seemed capable of leaping through the stratosphere. As with its predecessor, the main bridge of the craft, protruding forward near the prow, truly looked like the head of a horse, which was of course why the first ship of this class of this class had been called Pegasus. Federation forces had christened the second ship with the same name as the first, not only because of the physical resemblance, but because the original crew had been transferred to it, and because General Revel believed it would bring them good luck. With the officers on the bridge marveling at the sight, the Gundam approached the Pegasus II and logged the correct coordinates for landing on Deck 1, the ship's right front leg. Leg is in quotes. Right front leg. The upper and lower hatch doors of Deck 1 opened, exposing the landing floor and its approach lights. The Gundam moved straight toward them, a line of horizontal green lights on either side of the deck, blinking in confirmation of its course. Simultaneously, indicators showing horizontal status, attitude, and speed relative to the ship blinked in sync on Amuro's console. Laser sensors were accurate at distances under 2,000 meters, even with a heavy Minovsky concentration. The hatch quickly looming into view was huge, but the landing site still wasn't an easy target. The Gundam sailed toward the center of it, streaking by painted white guidelines. Then, with a whoosh, retro rockets fired. The suit's knees bent to absorb the shock, and both of its legs hit the ground simultaneously. Amuro had made a perfect single-point landing.
Congratulations, Ensign!
Kai Shiden's voice echoed from the upper left 3-inch from the upper left 3-inch mini monitor in Amuro's cockpit.
It looked beautiful!
Amuro grinned bashfully at the image on the screen. As he released his seatbelt, he replied, "I used to be able to fly by the seat of my pants, but I think I forgot how. I broke out in a cold sweat a couple times back there." On the next monitor over, the face of the flight deck supervisor appeared, yelling,
G3, stand by for 30 seconds. Do not open your cockpit hatch until air intake is completed on Deck 1.
It belonged to a young recruit Amuro had never seen before, who immediately introduced himself with loud enthusiasm.
Petty Officer First Class Callahan Slay, sir. At your service, sir.
He seemed so overzealous, Amuro wondered if he would be able to stay calm in times of crisis.
Glad to be working with you, Callahan. 20 seconds have already elapsed. 20 seconds. Yes, sir. Go ahead and open the hatch, sir.
Amuro pulled a lever and opened the cockpit hatch. It shared space with his main display, which meant to exit. Sorry, let's try that sentence again. It shared space with his main display, which meant that to exit, he had to use a footrest built into the far right of the console panel, and then ease his torso out. A ramp from the right wall of the flight deck extended out to his cockpit.
Well, how was it?
It was Lieutenant Seki, a technical officer Amuro had known ever since his days on Luna 2.
No problem, sir. The magnetic coating seems to work perfectly. Well, I'll still give it a once-over to check for anything unusual. You know how it is. I've got to compensate for those scientists and the top brass. They always tend to rush these things.
You think there might be a problem with the coating, sir?
If there is, it's a relative problem. The structural materials used in the Gundam's design aren't going to get any stronger. In some ways, it's safer if you can't move the thing too fast.
Sounds to me, sir, that you're saying we need to compromise on speed for safety's sake.
Exactly. But we're talking about a combat suit here, so combat performance gets priority. The brass apparently assume anyone operating this thing has the skills of a test pilot.
Amuro laughed despite himself. There was more than a little irony in Seki's words. After all, the Pegasus II and its entire crew were part of a grand experiment. They were all, in a sense, test pilots.
Basically, Ensign, I want to keep you alive as long as possible.
The sentiment's shared, sir. Amuro replied, removing his helmet and starting to walk down the ramp to the flight deck. Then he heard a "Yo!" and saw a smiling face in a lemon-yellow pilot suit. It was Kai Shiden.
Oh, hey, Kai.
he asked, pointing at a new red MS to the rear of Deck 1. You piloting that gun cannon over there? Gun cannons, like the Gundam, were of humanoid design and had two arms capable of holding a beam rifle, but they weren't as suited for close-quarter combat as the Gundam or the GIM models. Instead, the twin 28-centimeter cannons built into their shoulders were used primarily for long-range support.
Yeah, Kai answered without enthusiasm. That's the C-108. It'll do the job, maybe.
Kai didn't have the type of positive personality Amuro normally admired, but the two of them had begun their pilot training together, survived combat together, and now were linked by a bond different from friendship, but just as real.
Everyone's waiting for you, partner, Kai said.
Since being reunited with his comrades on the LH docking pier, Amuro had spent 2 days alone working with Mosk, readying the new Gundam. Now he would finally, hopefully, be able to spend a little time relaxing with them on the ship. Just thinking about it made him feel flush with anticipation, but there was still an enormous amount of work to do. The Pegasus II carried 5 mobile suits, including the Gundam, and several hours would be required to train the suit pilots to work as a team, in formation. Amuro's first assignment was to lead a special training session on the ship's bridge. The moment he stepped into the room, he was warmly welcomed. Bright, in the captain's seat, saluted and barked, "Congratulations, Ensign!"
Well, how was the flight?
Mirai asked.
You looked great out there, Amuro. Well done, Hayato added.
Amuro first noticed the new faces among the group, including Ensigns Sarkis McGovern and Kriya Maja. Maha? It's a J. Kriya Maja, both new MS pilots. But he also saw some old ones. Marker Clan and Oscar Dublin grinned at him from their operator seats on the bridge boom crane. And when Sayla Mass turned around and smiled at him, he nearly choked. With her blonde hair and nearly perfect posture, she looked more beautiful than he remembered. Perhaps, he suddenly thought, she really was the woman of his dreams. He felt a little confused. Before taking off in the new Gundam from the LH moon base, when sitting in the pitch blackness of his new cockpit, he had experienced a sort of intuitive communion with the memory of Lala Soon. But there had been something missing with Lala, and here it was. For the first time since parting with Kusko Al, he felt physical desire.
Congratulations, Ensign,
Sayla said. Her clear voice was music to his ears.
I never realized how much I wanted her.
Amuro, surprised at himself, decided to invite her to join him that very night. That very night. There we go. Chapter 12. People.
For the life of me, I can't understand why Girin would call me back to the fatherland on the eve of our showdown with the Federation.
In the vast hall of the Zeon War Council, Vice Admiral Dozal Zabi deliberately blurted out the words loud enough so that his father, Sovereign Degwin, seated on his throne, could easily hear them. Dozal's elder brother Girin, the supreme commander chairing the council, did not react at all, and merely continued to lord it over those in attendance. He was flanked by both Dozal and his sister, Rear Admiral Caecilia, and a bevy of ranking Zeon officers under Zabi family control. Technically, a civilian government ruled Zeon, but even the layout of the room reflected a bargain struck between image and reality. Prime Minister Darcia Bakharov, along with several ministers under his influence, was one of the few civilians to rise to power through the ranks of the bureaucracy, and was thus supposed to have been given a seat of honor near Sovereign Degwin Zabi. Since the Zabi family depended on the military, however, he was seated the farthest away. 1/3 of his cabinet ministers were controlled by the Zabi family. Degwin, nominally an observer at such meetings, had already been reduced to a puppet. True power lay in the hands of his son, Supreme Commander Girin Zabi. The Prime Minister's occasional reluctance to conform had created a suspicion in some quarters that he harbored a desire to depose Supreme Commander Girin and restore Degwin to power. Girin was fully aware of the rumor, yet prepared to tolerate it. He was accustomed to scheming minds, and knew intrigues were a normal part of human nature. He knew, moreover, that as long as the rumors were not an overt threat, there was no use in trying to suppress them completely, and that doing so would only be counterproductive. As long as Darcia was restrained, therefore, Girin would not take action against the man. All he had to do, he believed, was to tighten the reins of control and make him subtly aware of the futility of his scheming. That was the type of man Girin was. He would let his brother Dozle raise as much fuss as he wanted. As long as there was no major change in the overall picture, he knew his position was secure. He could trust his sister Caecilia to keep the rest of the situation under control.
Vice Admiral Dozle, Caecilia began, replying to her brother's earlier comment, if, as we suspect, the Federation forces have detected what we are up to, then I respectfully submit that there is only one issue that must be urgently addressed today, and that is the state of progress on our system project. We must keep our perspective.
Girin noted that, as he had hoped, Caecilia was working to keep Dozle in line. Caecilia glanced at Girin after her statement, and then turned to Prime Minister Darcia.
We need you to give us an overview of the system project as proposed by the Supreme Commander.
Darcia thereupon launched into a prepared presentation. For most of the officials present, it was the first time they had heard of the plan, but the principle behind it was elegantly simple. Zeon's older colonies consisted of sealed cylinders 6 kilometers in diameter by 30 kilometers in length. One of these would be evacuated, and the inner walls coated with aluminum. Solar energy would be stored and concentrated in a powerful electromagnetic field inside, and then released by suddenly opening one end of the cylinder. It entailed a massive construction project, and would thus take time, but if all went as planned, the result would be a weapon of unprecedented destructive power, a giant laser cannon 6 kilometers in diameter. If properly aimed, an entire battle group, perhaps even half of the Federation forces, could be instantly annihilated. Well, given travel time, but sure. For the Principality of Zeon, whose forces were from the beginning limited and now nearing the point of exhaustion, the system, as the project was codenamed, was an extremely attractive strategy.
The Cabinet, Darcia announced, wishes to keep Zeon's civilian casualties to a minimum, and to do this we must bring the war to its earliest possible conclusion. We therefore have resolved to endorse the system project.
The Prime Minister's announcement was important, as without a national consensus the project could never be completed. The system required not only a massive budget, but also the evacuation of over 3 million people from an older existing colony, and the cooperation of a wide variety of industries.
Dozle sniffed. What do we need a cabinet resolution for?
Hold your tongue, brother,
Caecilia hissed, again acting just as Girin had hoped. Darcia raised his voice another notch and continued,
Accordingly, given the nature of this measure, we wish to propose that it be seriously discussed by all parties in attendance today, and then, in order to obtain the final authorization of His Excellency, Sovereign Degwin, that it be submitted for formal approval.
2 or 3 questions then followed, all of which revolved around the prospects of total victory. There was no need to debate anything else. Unbeknownst to Unbeknownst to most civilians present, the project was already well underway, and the evacuation of Zeon's third colony cylinder, Mahal, was proceeding under the supervision of a high-ranking Zeon officer. The council fell silent for several minutes. All present sensed the tightening web of Girin's total control. But distracted by all the attention to a single grandiose strategy, or by the fate of this or that Zeon warship, few truly realized that the Zeon nation had begun to move in a direction of its own. It was, needless to say, a totally different direction from what they suspected. Prime Minister Darcia took the cabinet's written proposal, placed it in a black leather file with the Principality of Zeon's seal, and walked toward Degwin. No one in the hall spoke. Girin kept staring at the long tabletop in front of him, and his face took on an ashen hue. Darcia ascended the 3 steps in front of Degwin's throne, placed the file on a stand next to it, and stiffly slid it toward the sovereign. And then he heard words that made him doubt his own ears.
My eldest son is a blot on my honor,
Degwin whispered.
do with him as you please.
Zeon's sovereign had never uttered such a thing, even behind closed doors. Perhaps he's going senile, Darcia thought for a second. He stared at Degwin's spectacles, trying to fathom the expression in the eyes behind them, but the man had already reached out for a pen to sign the document, and his face was turned away. Darcia hoped the words he had heard were a figment of his imagination. He was a civilian, with precious few connections in the military elite. His real role in the government was to provide a civilian face to the Zeon people. Like Degwin, he was really only a puppet, and what could a conspiracy between 2 puppets possibly accomplish? Degwin put down his pen, smiled, and whispered words unrelated to his expression.
It's Caecilia, isn't it?
What did he mean? Darcia wondered. Was he trying to say that he should use Caecilia to crush Girin? As far as Darcia was concerned, Caecilia was just as formidable a threat as Girin. Thank you, Your Excellency, he nonetheless replied, returning Degwin's smile. Then he turned around and walked over toward Girin. When viewed from behind in his military uniform, Girin's neck looked as thick as a log, invulnerable even to a beam saber blade. Darcia opened the file and showed Girin his father's signature. Well done, Darcia, Girin said. He normally looked at people with a cold, piercing expression, but his mouth was now formed into a thin smile. Thank you, sir, Darcia answered. Then he turned to either side, showed the same file to Dozel and Caecilia, and after receiving their acknowledgment, returned to his own seat, the lowest in the hierarchy. Girin next rose and addressed the council. 1 hour from now we shall hold a comprehensive strategy meeting at the Joint Chiefs of Staff headquarters. Let me humbly express my appreciation for the time and wise counsel you have all invested in this issue. Like us, the Federation forces are nearing exhaustion, but a new element has been introduced into the balance of power. Now that the system plan has been authorized, what we have gained in strength is equivalent to between 5 to 10 new divisions. I am proud to say, frankly, that our decision has altered the odds of victory in our favor. It is an accomplishment that every citizen of Zeon should take pride in, for the system project is a crystallization of all of our labor and sweat. The system strategy will henceforth be the centerpiece of our operations. I ask now that each and every one of you take this fact fully to heart, to exert your utmost to destroy the Federation forces as soon as possible, and thus gain honor for the Principality of Zeon. May you and your families prosper. Death to our enemies! In the midst of Girin's speech, Degwin Zabi stood up and left.
It was already past 7 o'clock meantime when the Pegasus II and its 5 mobile suits finished practicing combat formation flight and returned to the LH moon base. In the base docking bay, several Salamis-class cruisers were already moored, and preparations for the upcoming mission were proceeding at a feverish pitch. Before leaving the bridge, Amuro loosened his pilot's suit and turned to Bright in the captain's seat.
"When do we ship out next, Skipper?" he asked. "How the hell should I know? You think they'd tell me? All I know is that we have to perform all pre-flight maintenance within 28 hours." "And we take off right after that?" "I doubt it. We're talking about the military here, remember? But there's always the possibility we'll have to leave even earlier, so just in case you'd better get as much sleep as you can tonight. My gut feeling is that we'll be here another 2 nights, but who knows?" "Understood, sir. Do you think my stuff has been delivered to officers' quarters on base?" "Your stuff?" "Just one duffel bag, that's all." "Probably."
A duffel bag was military slang for a waterproof denim sack that held a single standard-issue military uniform. It was an anachronistic term in the space age, but still popular, a holdover from naval traditions of a bygone era. Turning to Petty Officer Selah Mass, Bright said, "He doesn't seem to know his way around this place. Show him to his quarters."
"Yes, sir,"
she replied. Still engrossed in her work at the comm console, she quickly added,
"Just give me 2 to 3 minutes, okay?"
While waiting, Amuro watched Bright monitor the pre-flight checks on the bridge displays and bark orders throughout the new ship. Things seemed to have changed so much, he noted, and so fast. The bridge was bustling with activity and alive with a new energy he did not recall from before. Was it because many of the crew were wow, I'm falling apart. Was it because many of the crew were potential new types? There was no way of knowing for certain, but there was a palpably different, though intangible, aura about them. He sensed something unlike the emotive communion he had had with Lala Soon, and for a moment he wondered if the difference was simply because he wasn't properly attuned to his crewmates. But he decided it was more than that. There was something clear, soft, even reassuring in the atmosphere. It was a peaceful feeling, almost like home. There was no point on dwelling on the reasons. Had it not been wartime, with all its attendant tensions, he would have abandoned himself to the sensation and been lulled into a deep and restful sleep.
"Sorry to keep you waiting, Ensign."
At the sound of the overly polite voice, Amuro turned around to see Selah. She was carrying a thick file, which reminded him of the studious young woman he had first encountered on Side 7's Zeravi library. But she seemed tired. It was odd, because she had been so energetic when working earlier. And standing close to her, he sensed more than fatigue, something closer to melancholy, for lack of a better term. For some reason, he was suddenly also acutely aware of the fact that she was of the opposite sex. He wondered what was troubling her, and what to do, but he decided not to dwell on it. Her mood was probably just a normal part of her overall emotional makeup.
"This way."
She turned away from him and walked toward one of the 2 hatches in the rear of the bridge. He followed, watching. She was a year or 2 older than he was, but a tad shorter. As usual, he admired her pretty blonde hair. When they reached the elevator that would lead them out to the docking bay, he asked,
"Well, have you finally gotten used to life on ship?" "Why, yes, thank you," she replied. "At least I don't get in everyone's way any more. And, by the way, I'm glad you made it back okay, Ensign." "Whoa, please, let's cut out the rank. You'll embarrass me." "Well, I'm a petty officer 2nd class. You're an ensign. This is the military, isn't it?" "Well, yes, but damn it, don't be that way with me, Selah." Just between the 2 of us, then? What should I Oh, sorry. Just between
My lips are losing it.
My lips are losing it.
Sorry.
Just between
Just between the two of us, then. There we go. Sorry, recalibrating.
just between the two of us, then. What should I call you, Ensign?
Uh, um, Unable to answer properly, Amuro began to grind his teeth. It was weird. Here he was, a seasoned combat veteran. Somehow he had assumed that would help him relate to her on a more equal adult basis, but so much for that idea. He was stammering away, another naive delusion shattered. He fell silent. 20 seconds later, the elevator stopped at the ship's upper deck, and the instant the door opened, they were enveloped in a cacophony of sound. They ought to let the air out of the hangars when they do pre-flight maintenance and supply operations, Amuro thought reflexively. The upper deck was at the base of the ship's bridge, and from it one could look out the open hatches of the starboard and port leg-like extremities. The hangars of the LH docking bay were on two staggered levels, and on the lower one a transport ship that had moored was busy unloading ammunition and weaponry. On the upper level, the work crews Amuro had never seen before On the upper level, work crews Amuro had never seen before were engaged in a flurry of activity, and clearly a source of most of the noise. They were already welding parts of the Pegasus II deck, and even stripping off parts of its armor. Amuro tried to cross over to the mooring pier, but tripped on a ladder. He grumbled to spite himself at an officer in front of him holding a transceiver. "What the hell's going on?"
What's the matter? The repairs bother you?
The officer turned around, and Amuro had to stifle a gasp. It was Matilda Ajan, the pretty junior-grade lieutenant from the 28th Division, whom he had met once before on Luna II. "Ensign!" she said, as surprised as he was. I don't remember what voice I used for Matilda. I think that might have been in Irish. As when they had first met, he noted her auburn hair. It was a shame that she kept it so short. I'm sorry, I spoke out of line," he mumbled.
Never mind, Ensign. Ensign Amuro Ray, isn't it? I remember you. Lieutenant Woody Malden's in charge of the repairs, and you can trust him 100%. He says the Pegasus needs a more consistent thickness of armor plating.
Lieutenant Woody Malden?
An officer from the armory.
She pointed with her chin in the direction of an officer engineer with a powerful physique, who turned around as if on cue. Amuro silently mouthed the name Woody, and for a moment couldn't think of anything else to say. The timing between Matilda and Woody could have been accidental, but then again, it probably wasn't. The officer had responded in a special way to her. He was a handsome man with heavy eyebrows and full lips, twinkling eyes, and an active demeanor, exactly the type Amuro suspected Matilda would go for. And he was in a unit with which she would naturally have a lot of contact. "You say something, Matilda?" Woody asked, walking over toward them. He seemed to have absolutely no trouble handling moon gravity. He looks and acts like a real combat veteran, Amuro thought.
No, sir, Matilda replied. This is Ensign Amuro Ray. He was just asking what you're doing.
Amuro heard a slight quaver in Matilda's voice and turned away from the pair in embarrassment. "Some problem?" Woody asked.
"No, sir," Amuro fired back. "Just an opinion stated without knowing the facts. I'm sure the Pegasus is in good hands."
He saluted and jumped off the ladder toward the pier itself.
"Amuro,"
Sayla called out after him as he sailed through the low-gravity air. When the concrete surface of the pier filled his vision, Amuro flexed his knees and landed. To his surprise, Sayla landed beside him only seconds later.
"Amuro, what's the matter with you?"
she cried, regretting her choice of words before she had completed her sentence. She felt flustered herself. He sensed her emotion, but he wasn't ready to think of its implications. He was still preoccupied with Matilda Ajan and the sudden realization that she was in love with someone. He had no idea why it bothered him. He didn't have a crush on her or anything like that, he told himself, although he knew his reaction spoke otherwise. Maybe, it occurred to him, he was simply too immature and inexperienced around women. But maybe he was just too self-critical. Just having a woman like Sayla or Matilda stand in front of him was enough to overload his brain and paralyze him. He knew he could never compare himself favorably with Woody, for example. If Matilda so much as tossed her auburn hair in the direction of Woody, for example, he knew the confident officer would grab her right away. Just thinking about it made him feel all the more humiliated. "Amuro!" Sayla said, grabbing his left arm. "What?" he said, noticing her blonde hair again. She was so different from Matilda. "That building over there. That's the quarters you've been assigned to," she said with an official tone. Most men would have detected a tinge of jealousy in her words, but Amuro was oblivious to it. She helped him check into the facility, where he was assigned his private quarters. As an ensign, he was on a different floor than Sayla, who was housed with the junior officers. As he was about to step into the elevator to go to his room, he turned to her and asked, "Will you join me for dinner tonight?" "But, Amuro, you're probably busy and tired, right?" No. Heck, besides, I don't get the chance to eat with you very often. I'd love it if you'd join me." "If you'd join me." There we go. She nodded an okay, and they agreed to meet in the mess hall in 15 minutes. He then proceeded up to his room, where he was showered and changed and wished he had time to polish his shoes. Something about the way she had agreed to join him seemed a little vague and bothered him. Sayla showed up a few minutes late, apologizing and looking different. To his surprise, she had put on a touch of lipstick. Their eyes met, and he realized she really had been looking forward to their date, but he also recognized something in her that did remind him of Lala. Perhaps Sayla really was a Newtype, too. There was only one reason he suspected so. There was something in her eyes he had never noticed before, something subjective, something that couldn't be explained logically. It was as if she had another aura about her, one darker, more ponderous. He knew it wasn't malevolent, but whatever it was, it made Sayla seem different. Perhaps he had been blind all along, blinded by his impression of her as the bungler on the ship, blinded by the childlike interest he had had in her ever since Side 7. He knew she had managed to lead the Pegasus survivors to safety before Texas had blown up. He knew that whatever image he had had of her in the past, it was time to revise it. "Something the matter, Amuro?" she asked, looking at him oddly. "Nothing. I... He started to say something, but stopped. The most important thing at this point was to just sit down and calm down, but he was in a self-service dining room, with all the bothersome procedures it always entailed. "Congratulations on your escape from Texas," he said as they started eating. "I heard all about how the Pegasus was put out of action." "Thanks, but I wasn't on the ship at the end." "You weren't?" "That's right." It had never occurred to him before. Did she mean that she had abandoned her post and fled? The rules were sometimes bent for the waves in the military, but desertion was an offense for which men and women were judged equally. "What happened? Some sort of new type impulse grab you?" he feebly joked. "I could feel the enemy," she said hesitatingly. "It felt like a powerful force. I knew the whole crew would be in danger, so I left to locate an escape route from the colony." Wow. 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 Sayla was feeding him a half lie. But it was true that after parting with her brother Shar Aznable, she had worked feverishly to help rescue the crew of the doomed Pegasus. In fact, as some of the crew had later told Amuro, they had heard her voice mysteriously come out of nowhere. "Did you know where that crew were when the ship finally went down?" "No, I didn't know where they were, but they apparently knew where I was." "See, you must be a new type. I can't believe it myself. Do you really think this is the way new type powers appear in people?" I did some research on new types when I was on Side 6, Sayla, and they're not supposed to be able to do anything supernatural. But if many people can do what you did, the scientists will probably have to rethink the whole concept. Don't read too much into what I did. The new types Zeon Daikun spoke of were supposed to symbolize something much more universal, something that applies to all mankind. So? They're not supposed to be people who dash off on a whim, like me. She put her fork down on the table. You know what? It's a one-sided affair for me. A one-sided affair? What on earth did she mean? His ears immediately pricked up. Was she trying to tell him she was in love with someone? I have an older brother, Amuro. Someone I haven't seen for years and years. I've got a bit of a hang-up about the whole thing. Sometimes I have something like a seizure when I'm near him. I'm sorry, I know this all sounds weird. An older brother? A seizure? Amuro was perplexed. What in heaven's name was she talking about? What did this have to do with their discussion of new types? It's like something suddenly goes off in my mind sometimes. Maybe in this case it helped me save the others. Sayla, when you say seizure, do you mean something that might conceivably happen between two new types if, say, their minds were on the same wavelength? The sort of thing that might suddenly expand their consciousness, even project it? Amuro chose his words carefully, thinking of Lala soon. You've quite a way with words, Ensign, she said. Then she looked into his eyes and added, And you may be right. Think so? Yes. I know you use the word seizure, Sayla. Sorry. Freudian slip. Oh no! On my part. I know you use the word seizure, Sayla, but I think you're really referring to a special ability, something dormant until activated by a sudden stimulus. Right? Right. It's sort of like when Amuro didn't need to Amuro didn't need to hear the rest. He completed the sentence for her. Like when you met your brother Shar Aznable. It was incredible, but he knew exactly what she was trying to say. Sayla blanched. Forgive me, he quickly added. Just my imagination running wild. No, she replied hoarsely. It's true. How did you know? Now it was Amuro's turn to feel shocked. It wasn't the sort of connection, after all, that could be easily deduced. That's a good question, he replied. I don't know. I wish I did, but I don't. Sweat started to bead on his brow, and he raised his hand to wipe it. How the hell could he know? He didn't have the faintest idea. The whole conversation was starting to confuse him enormously. He looked at her. Maybe she had the answer. If anyone did, it would have to be her. He was sure she had something to do with what he had just sensed. Come to think of it, there was something similar about the aura he sensed around her and that which he had once sensed in Shar Aznable. But it was easy to make a logical connection after the fact. He waited for her to say something. As long as we're on this track, she continued haltingly, you want to know something else? Shar's real name is Kasval Daikun. Mine's Artesia Daikun, and we're the children of Zeon Daikun. Sayla Mass is the name I took after my brother and I fled from Zeon to Earth. Well, how's that for a shocker? Amuro was stunned by her words. He glanced around the room, and his nervous system went on a 360-degree alert. If anyone overheard their conversation, there would be hell to pay. This is not the place for that sort of talk, Sayla, he cautioned in a low voice. Maybe I made it all up. She countered with a weak smile. Sayla, I honestly don't know if you did or not, but to me it's got to be real. There we go. It's the only way I can understand what I've been sensing in you. You think we're kindred spirits, Amuro? For lack of a better word, yes. I felt the same way with Shar, with Lala, and even with Kusko Al. Lala? Kusko Al? Who are they? They're Zeon Newtypes. I had to fight Lala on Texas, and Kusko Al's probably the next one I'll face. I got to know her through the intelligence organization on Side 6. She's a new type. So Zeon's really deploying new types in combat. Right, Amuro sighed, while the Federation still thinks there's some sort of joke.
Oh, thanks for tuning in, Dr. Jim Eagle II, if I'm reading that correctly. Sometimes the text is a little tiny. Out of curiosity, are you planning on uploading this narration for people who've missed the earlier streams? I already have. I've got you covered, friend. Let me get you a link. I might not have the playlist updated, but they're all there on my YouTube channel. Let me stop opening the wrong tab. There we go. Much better. Much better. Is that 6? Oh, I do have all of the 6 in the current playlist. Here is a link to my playlists section. 1. And here is a link to the playlist itself. Hopefully that's actually in order. And of course it is not, because that would make sense. Thank you so much, YouTube. I don't know which of these is the right order, because my episode 3 got chopped in half for some reason. I don't remember which one is which. So we'll just go with that. Let me get back to the playlist view. So I can actually get the playlist, copy, paste. They are all on YouTube. I stream directly to YouTube, so it should all automatically be there. They haven't removed anything yet over time. If that second link doesn't work, it's fine. You'll be able to get to it through the other one, the first one. There is some video overlap between that and Mecha Mondays because I do them to both. I'm going to have them as Mecha Mondays is going to be kind of a general container for all of the ones done within a time period, and then an individual book will be in its own playlist, which means I have like, I don't know, that's what, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 33 playlists and counting, which isn't ideal, but it works. You've got a great voice for Amuro, by the way. Enjoying your style very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It's maybe a little derivative. I'm not going with a terribly original voice for Amuro, but it works. It was what I felt seemed appropriate. Kai is basically Kai. I don't know how well it's translating. The English dub Kai, who is just iconic. He's like, there's a number of voices in the English dub of the original series that I hear in my sleep. Kai's happens to be one of them. I'm doing British Bright because I'm goofy like that, and I enjoy British Bright from the movie trilogy. It's a fun time. So, serious talk about new types, and Sayla dropping the, by the way, I'm the sister of like the #1 guy in the Zeon combat forces, like the big propaganda figure of the Red Comet. I'm his sister. And Amuro's like, keep it down! Don't say that! Where was I? Oh, here we go. More water! Oh, God! I try to do them in like 2-ish hour chunks. Excuse me. So that they aren't overly long, as opposed to reading for like 16 hours straight to get through an entire book in one day, which, first of all, would kill me, and second of all, would be all I'd do that day. So it'd be tough. It could be done, but I'd rather do it in chunks. That way I can spread it out. That way I can plan ahead. Actually, that's a big reason, is planning ahead. Which I do by the seat of my pants, but in terms of finding, here's the list of books I want to go through in a given period, it helps. Kai Shiden suddenly entered the dining room with several mecha men, heading for the tables in the corner.
Yo, Ensign Amuro, he called out. Having a good time? And the petty officer? How about a date with me tonight, sweetie?
Too bad, Mr. Kai, Sayla bantered back, her clear voice echoing through the dining hall. I've already got one ensign here, and he's more than enough to keep me company.
Amuro's jaw dropped in amazement. He stared at her, feeling terribly self-conscious, while Kai's table erupted in laughter and wolf whistles.
Yo, Don Juan, the irresistible, someone said in his direction. It's no fair. You join our ship late and then walk off with one of our prize waves. What have you got to say for yourself, man?
In the midst of the teasing, Sayla turned and, with a twinkle in her eye, whispered,
Don't make me lose face now, Amuro. Go along with me and make it up to them later. You know, buy them a drink or take them out to dinner.
Go along with you? Me?
Amuro gulped. Sure, you are irresistible, you know.
Something about the way she said it bothered Amuro. It reminded him of the overly flirtatious Kusko Al. And when he thought of Kusko, the memory of Fra Bo washed over him. When he looked back at Sayla, she was already standing up to leave, expecting him to follow. Oh boy, I forgot that Shalia Bull was going to get introduced here. Oh geez, I don't even remember what I was going to do for Shalia Bull. Oh no. Oh dear. Okay, so we've actually heard reference to to Chalia Bull already on a previous installment. And definitely listen to those to get caught up because there is like the raw. I had honestly forgotten. It's been like 10 years since I've read this. I had honestly forgotten the raw density of detail that's in here. Um, some of it's like rehash, and they'll rehash like every other chapter certain details, but it's like it's wild. So Chalia Bull has already been, uh, and they might rehash this here, but this is a quick interjection aside. So right now, in Zeon, there is a push to make a dedicated Newtype combat core. Where you basically have a group of people with new type potential who are plugged into weapon systems doing new type combat type things in order to get a leg up on the Federation with raw combat piloting talent. So as a result of this, uh, nominally the big zombie name behind this new type project, the big backer, is Caecilia Zabi. And so, and Shar is kind of her golden boy at this point. So she's kind of got control over. She doesn't really have control over the Flanagan Institute, but she's got her tentacles in the Flanagan Institute. She's got more or less a certain degree of control over the new type core program. However, Giran is trying to get in on that action, and Chalia Bull is a guy being sent with ostensibly with new type potential, being sent at Giran's behest to this new type core project for reasons that one can only guess at, possibly for to spy on them, whether he has new type potential or not. I think he's just come back from a run to Jupiter for helium 3. I'm pretty sure that's correct. There's a lot going on here. I try to keep interruptions to a minimum, but there's a lot. There is a lot, and like uh, Jupiter civilization is one of the and really anything outside of the immediate Earth sphere is one of the few things that I feel is a massively missed opportunity to go into in the Universal Century timeline. Technically, we have some insight on the Jupiter, the life around Jupiter from Crossbone Gundam, but that thing's status in canon is, I think, questionable. It doesn't really matter because Bandai doesn't care, and Bandai really own the
hold the reins at this point. So,
It's for those model kits, bucko.
okay, so I have to come up. I'm spending this time to come up with a Chalia Bull voice. I swear this has been productive. I think it's a little dangerous to write off the Supreme Commander as a mere fanatic, Lieutenant Chalia Bull murmured to Shar Aznable. He does have some leadership qualities. The two men, along with Kusko Al, had gathered in an officer's music listening room on Abo Aku. It was soundproofed, but they kept their voices low anyway. I agree, said Shar. We can't overlook the fact that there is genuine support in Zeon for the dictatorship. Chalia nodded, but seemed to be pondering something else. Shar was beginning to rethink his opinion of the lieutenant. I think this is literally the first time we've seen them in the same room, though. I don't think they've even met. They've met off screen at this point. Okay. This is a bit confusing. A lot I forgot how much goes down in the middle book. It's crazy. Where were we? Oh, yes. Chalia nodded, but seemed to be pondering something else. Shar was beginning to rethink his opinion of the lieutenant. A Newtype candidate who had arrived on Abo Aku only 6 hours earlier, he was of medium build and height, and not the type that stood out in a crowd. But there was something about the way he carried himself, and the slightly hollowed look in his cheeks, that spoke of extraordinary endurance. His resume said that he was 28, yet he looked far older. He seemed awfully cautious, but for someone in charge of the Jupiter transports, that was probably an important quality to have. If you ask me, Kusko Al interjected, the real tragedy of our Supreme Commander is that his ambition exceeds his ability. Don't you think so? Kusko was striking in her military uniform. She wore it well. So well, in fact, that it almost looked as though Zeon's rather fashionable officers' uniforms had been specifically designed for her. But Shar was unimpressed. Something about her always irritated him. He had no problem with women in the force acting a little different from the men. There was certainly no need for them to be exactly the same. But Kusko tended to ignore even the basic protocols of military hierarchy. And it wasn't just because she was something of a free spirit. Her parents had come from some place. I should never have given her an Irish accent. It makes no sense. Uh, so this, unfortunately, is why doing this on the fly is sometimes not a great plan. I should have twigged to her name. I don't think she's even in the animated series. I'm 98% sure. I don't remember her in the animated series. Chalia Bull has like a whopping 5 minutes of screen time. He's in like an episode, maybe an episode and a half. It's wild. It's wild. So Charlie is much more important in this. There's an actual character there, as opposed to a one-off dude who bites it within 20 minutes. Where were we? So yeah, and it wasn't just because she was something of a free spirit. Her parents had come from some place called Argentina on Earth, but had divorced. She had moved to Side 3 as part of the forced emigration program to the space colonies. There was something self-destructive about her. Listen, Kusko, Shar cautioned. We have to be careful not to speculate too much on his character. He wanted to put her in her place, but her eyes flashed in defiance. We've got to keep track of what he's doing, he continued, and collect more hard data on him. But we have to be careful. One wrong move and the people who are supposed to be our allies will do us in. He added the last statement because, more than anything else, he feared that she would leak word of their conversation to the wrong party. It seemed to work, for she fell silent. I may not be subordinate to Caecilia forever, he continued, but for now remember that we're under the command of Her Excellency, and that without her we're doomed. Understand? Chalia softly asked, You mean you'll follow her as long as it fits in with your personal plans? Oh, sorry. You mean you'll follow her as long as it fits in with your personal plans, correct, sir?
Let's be blunt, said Shar. I'll say yes, and you'll believe me, right?
Why are men always so power-hungry? Kusko interjected again.
Be careful, Kusko, Shar cautioned again. We didn't invite you in on this discussion.
Maybe, she retorted with a laugh, but you haven't asked me to leave either. And I know why. Because you'd feel guilty if you did, right?
No, we're letting you stay because you're a Newtype, and we've got no choice. But there's no time to argue that point. There's something very important I've still got to confirm with Shalia.
Go ahead. You've already said enough to make me a co-conspirator.
To Shar's surprise, Chalia laughed. She's right, Commander. Char and I'm trying to make Chalia have a hard CH. And it's hard when it's right after Char, which is a soft CH.
Because he's such a softy. Definitely not a borderline sociopath.
I have to stop interjecting because I am losing my spot. Wild as this part is. This part gets me excited, so I can't, because of its difference from how different it is from what we got in the original series.
Go ahead. You've already said enough to make me a co-conspirator.
To Shar's surprise, Shalia laughed. She's right, Commander. Shar and Chalia had originally planned to meet alone in the officer's private music listening room, but Kusko had somehow sensed their plans. Shar knew she had come out of curiosity more than anything else, and he felt obliged to let her stay, but it made him feel uneasy when Chalia talked about Girin Zabi in her presence. Chalia was a Newtype candidate, and he had been specifically sent under Girin's orders. There was a distinct possibility that he might be a spy, planted by Girin. As I intimated earlier, it's okay. Tamino repeats himself a bit. Sometimes. Sometimes he repeats himself. Gee, Recco, I'm looking at you. There's like zero repetition in that show. I need some sort of guarantee from you, Shar said, turning to Chalia. Since there's a strong possibility that you may represent Girin's interest in all this, how much can I trust you? You have my word. Isn't that enough? Perhaps yes. Perhaps not. The real reason I came here, Commander, was to confirm for myself that new types actually exist. Frankly, I don't fully believe I have any new type potential myself. You wanted to confirm for yourself? That's right, sir. Personally, I find the original theory of new types espoused by Zeon Zum-Daikun very appealing. He was an idealist, Chalia. Zeon Zum-Daikun had predicted that mankind would undergo a revolutionary transformation in outer space, that as men and women broke the boundaries of the planet Earth and moved further and further out into space, living throughout the universe, their consciousness would also expand and become more universal. The further they went, he believed, the more they would develop a powerful bond among themselves independent of physical distance. It would be an inevitable change and a logical step in the evolution of the human psyche. The original new type concept was simple and idealistic, but when war erupted, it took on an utterly new meaning. Perhaps because the military authorities of the Principality of Zeon were so embroiled in war, they were the first to interpret it in their own way, latching on to the notion that new types could be used for more specific, immediate purposes. As humans with paranormal powers, as pilots with prescience, as weapons of war. There's a bucket load of alliteration in there, if you like alliteration. Nice translation job. I greatly admired Zeon Daikun, Shalia said, continuing. It's a shame he didn't survive long enough to become more than just a revolutionary propagandist and visionary. He might have become the type of politician we really need today. No one can be everything, said Shar. Besides, politicians with too much personal ambition make me nervous. True, that sort of thing can shorten a person's life, and if you always have a hidden agenda, people start to distrust you, too. Shar's hands suddenly turned clammy. Chalia couldn't possibly know his real identity, but he might have sensed something. His words, page flipping, his words were getting close to the danger zone. He was, without a doubt, a man with considerable intuition. Shar replied as tactfully as possible. I may outrank you, Chalia, but you're older than I am, and more experienced. I think I have a lot to learn from you. He didn't like saying it in front of Kusko Al, and it made him resent her presence all the more. Even before meeting Chalia, he had noted an obstinate masculine pride in himself. Kusko spoke up, as if sensing what the two men were thinking. I know my being here probably bugs both of you, but hey, you won't find much double talk from me. Unlike you men, there's no hidden agenda in this girl. She meant to be sarcastic and help break the tension in a loopy sort of way, but her words didn't quite have the effect intended. All well and good, Shar said icily, but put your curiosity on hold, okay? Sometimes it's better to be in the dark about these things. Sometimes it's dangerous to get hooked up with people in a situation like this. Be realistic about what you're getting into, and conduct yourself in as responsible a fashion as possible. Humph, she replied petulantly. I can hardly change my personality, can I? In any case, I wouldn't want to. I like the way I am, thank you very much. In that case, Chalia said, you have to accept us as the way we are. Oh, sorry, that's a sentence that continues after that point. Oh my goodness. In that case, in that case, Chalia said, you have to accept us the way we are, too, and be a good girl and occasionally leave the room. Frankly, I prefer women who don't pretend to be so intelligent. Lieutenant! Kusko exclaimed. Shar couldn't help smirking. Chalia was capable of a more barbed tongue than he would have imagined. We are not asking you to change your personality, Kusko, Chalia continued, but it does create problems for us. We have to be careful. We might say something you don't like. How do we know you won't betray us to the zombie family? Well, if that's the way you feel, why'd you say all that stuff in front of me? You gave the answer earlier. We set you up as a co-conspirator. Shar Aznable has accepted me, Chalia Bull, a spy sent by Supreme Commander Giran as a partner in his plans. In the future, he's going to destroy Caecilia Zabi and eventually the Supreme Commander himself. You both must be dreaming. If you think so, Kusko. Oh, sorry. If you think so, Kusko, keep your nose out of it. Shar said. This is our business. The fact that Chalia came as Giran's spy to find out what Caecilia's up to, the fact of my plotting. Forget everything you heard. Understand? I can't believe you two, Kusko retorted. We're at war, Kusko. Kusko kicked off the floor and left the room upset. Chalia turned to Shar. Let's head over to the base bar, he said with a smile, and have a drink to clear the air a bit. Some of the girls over there are a little less trouble. Sounds great to me. To tell the truth, I'm not even sure myself why I have such a hard time getting along with her. It's just the way people are, Commander. You said it yourself earlier. No one can be everything to everyone. The two men turned off the lights and left the listening room. From outside the window, the moonlight streamed inside. Earth was out of sight. Out of sight.
Well, um, how a cult could form based on a belief that I promise we're going to be space magicians could happen. I'll never know. Listen, it's still not as silly as the premise that, oh, well, actually, the Federation predicted the idea of there being space magicians, and will have a very specific clause in the Federation Charter that will ensure that those people get like bonus space wizard rights. Um, but then we're going to hide that treaty away because in case those people ever show up, we might be able to get away with things going forward. I'm sorry, Unicorn's really dumb. Like, the entire core of the conflict of Unicorn is beyond silly. The Laplace box is maybe the... It's awful. It's just like, this just doesn't work on any level. Now, admittedly, that's part of the point, is that it's a really stupid thing to get worked up over. But, like, it completely... it's just... And that's not even starting on the time travel nonsense. We're not going there. I'm not touching it. Not with a stick. Not with a pole. It's not happening. I'm not touching it. If somebody ever decides to translate the novelizations of Unicorn, I'll happily read them. In fact, someone recently finished doing translations of the Zeta novelizations, so I may have to do that. I know the Sentinel translation's been out for a while. Hathaway, I think, is only halfway done. Or maybe the first 2 books are done out of 3. I'm not sure. I should check. And that's all fan work. This is official. What I'm reading right now is like horse's mouth. You know, this is as official as it gets for novelizations of Gundam properties. Oh boy, we are having a quick change of pace here. It was a good thing women had such warm, smooth skin, Amuro thought, as he spread his right hand over the gentle mound of Sayla's breast. Then he remembered what someone had once told him, that sleeping people have nightmares if something weighs upon their chest, and removed his hand, reluctantly letting it drift down to her side. His eyes lingered on the gentle shape of her breasts and the delicate outline of her nipples. It was a violation of military regulations for a woman to be in a male officer's quarters at night, but it happened all the time, and was never punished any more. Nearly 30% of the Federation forces were now waves, which is the term for female officers, and liaisons were overlooked as long as the following basic guidelines were observed. 1. Trainees could not be involved. The interaction could not be... Oh, sorry, there is no 1 there. Trainees could not be involved. The interaction could not be during a time of combat and had to take place in a private room. And everyone had to be in their original assigned quarters for lights out and reveille. The last rule was one of the reasons that, in some areas of the ship, there was a considerable amount of coming and going 10 minutes after the official lights out time. Attitudes towards sex had changed radically in the space age, but most people still looked askance at those who engaged in promiscuous sex or changed partners too frequently. Inappropriate behavior could result in harsh criticism from fellow crew members and accusations of being a playboy or playgirl, both terms with highly negative overtones. When Sayla had first entered Amuro's room, she had grinned and said, "I passed Mirai on the way here, but she doesn't suspect anything. Some of your pals back there in the dining hall probably feel jilted, though, so don't forget to be nice to them." Oh. That was all Amuro had managed to say. After that, he remembered little. She had received him, and he had felt vaguely dissatisfied after it was all over. Then she had said with a giggle, "If I'm ever assigned a private room, you can come visit me." That was 10 minutes ago. Now he could tell by her breathing that she was fast asleep. It was strange. At first he had thought oh my gosh, I am skipping words. It was strange. At first he had thought that she had come to him specifically to talk about Char Aznable. But to his surprise, it seemed she had just come to sleep with him. She had wrapped him in her exquisitely long limbs, and even mentioned her brother's name once. And not even mentioned her brother's name once. Wow! That was an awkward place to have the page fold and not see that word. That's a doozy. That's Freudian. Edible? Freudian. Okay, so let's reread that chunk.
I'm sorry. I'm having a rough time. Amro's Mondays are hard. At first, he had thought that she had come to him specifically to talk about Shar Aznable, but to his surprise, it seemed she had just come to sleep with him. She had wrapped him in her exquisitely long limbs and not even mentioned her brother's name once. There was definitely something unnerving about the ways of women, Amuro thought, wondering if Frau Bow were the same way. Then the fatigue from a long day caught up with him, and he fell asleep in the warmth of Sayla's body, marveling at how complex humans are. Amuro awoke abruptly to the sound of Sayla sobbing quietly, her face buried in a pillow, her shoulders shaking. "Sayla, what is it?" he asked. "Amuro," she sobbed almost inaudibly. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He gingerly placed his hand on her back, and, as she kept weeping, began gently massaging her. Then, to his surprise, she suddenly rolled over, jumped out of bed, and ran naked to the shower. It happened so fast that he only saw her white limbs flash for a second in the darkness. He roused himself, shocked. From the shower he could hear the water blasting her skin, and knew she had the pressure on especially high. With nothing to do but wait, he placed his hand on the impression her body had left on the bed, and enjoyed the residual warmth. And, as he occasionally did when frustrated, he began biting his right thumbnail. 10 minutes later the sound of the shower stopped. The door to the bathroom opened, and Sayla emerged, a bath towel wrapped around her torso. She walked straight over to him and announced, "Well, think I'm pretty?" "Very," he said. "Thanks." She sat down next to him and added, hesitatingly, "Listen, on a totally different subject, about tonight." He was absorbed in the beautiful lines of her neck and back, but he thought he knew exactly what she was going to say, that they wouldn't be able to sleep together again. To his amazement, she suddenly announced, "I love my brother Amuro, but he's gone too far. He's got some crazy ideas about what he can do with Newtypes, and I'm afraid he'll do something horrible. If you meet him, I want you to kill him." And then, seeing Amuro's shock, she added, "It hurts me to say it, but I mean it. I can't stand to think of my brother playing God. I'd rather see him dead." "I don't go around killing people for personal reasons," Amuro replied, his voice rising in anger. "Is this why you slept with me?" "No, no," she moaned softly. "It doesn't have anything to do with it." "Listen, Sayla, you're a complicated person. I've known you as the young blonde girl on side 7, as the Pegasus's communications officer, and now even as Artesia, daughter of the late Zeon Daikun. But there's only one real Sayla as far as I'm concerned, and you'll always be that Sayla. I don't like the Sayla I see now." "I'm sorry, Amuro, but I almost never have a chance to talk with you, so when I'm with you like this, everything gets mixed up, and you wind up misunderstanding me. It's not the way you think it is." "Maybe not. Maybe I'll never meet Shar again in combat. Who knows? Maybe I'll be killed first. Either way, in my book, what you just said is taboo." "Amuro, I don't think you can understand because you've never had a brother you really love." "Well, I sure hope I never love anyone so much I want them dead." He suddenly felt thirsty, and stood up and walked to the bathroom to get a drink. He was stark naked, but he didn't care. He wished Sayla would leave, and decided to kill some time by taking a shower, but minutes later, when he finally turned off the water, he could sense that she was still around. Sure enough, when he emerged, she was wrapped up in a blanket on his bed, lying face up, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. "I'm sorry," she said. "Let's go back to sleep." He thought about sleeping alone on the sofa in the room, but her warm body was just too tempting, and besides, it was his room and his bed. He lay down beside her, and before he slipped into sleep, he felt her hand reach out gently and touch his waist. Sorry, reach out and gently touch his waist. I don't know why I'm having dyslexia today.
He lay down beside her, and before he slipped into sleep, he felt her hand reach out and gently touch his waist. So, for the record, she did not ever say her brother's name while they were coupling. Yes, there is some foreshadowing. Tomino foreshadows. He does that. He does that a lot. Sometimes he does Frank Herbert tier foreshadowing, where he literally tells you this is what's going to happen, and then you just kind of have to ride the roller coaster to find out how that occurs. It's pretty great. I did not want to hit that button. I really hope that didn't break anything. It didn't. Good. I have to figure out how I fix that, but it's fine. So yeah, it is now clear, I think, to everyone that this is a bit different than the original series. This is a somewhat less filtered Tomino. He can be a bit of a raunchy guy, as it turns out, shockingly. Or rather, he's kind of quoted as saying that sex is part of the human condition, and to try to whitewash any created media from having any sexual overtones at all is kind of pointless, and you shouldn't necessarily do that. Not that it should be packed full to the gills with sex, but that you can have it in there, and it doesn't necessarily have to detract or distract from the story you're trying to tell. At least that's how I interpreted what I remember him saying from years ago. Anyway. That's going to do it for today. We'll do this again next week, next Monday. To anyone tuning in for the first time, hi, I do these live. The world was much freer back in the 70s. Sometimes it felt that way. Certain parts of the world, maybe, and at the same time, there were other social taboos, different ones. You know, all the ones that apply. Anyway, did I? Yes, I did do that properly. Very good. So yeah, I do this every week. Every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I stream starting at about noon Eastern Standard Time U.S., East Coast Time U.S. Often a couple minutes late, but not that many, not too long late. Mondays are Mecha Mondays, where I do something giant robot related or mecha adjacent. Right now, we're reading through the novelization of Mobile Suit Gundam by Yoshiyuki Tomino. It is fun. It is cool. It's very human. It's quite good. It makes for a nice adjunct to the original animated series and movie trilogy, while being quite different and having a very different ending. Which I will not spoil. It's a hell of a thing. It's a lot happens. It's a hell of a thing. This year is going to be the year of me doing just reading. That's all that's going to occur on all three streams. I've got a wordy Wednesday stream where I do just kind of miscellaneous stuff. Right now we're reading through Radicalized, a short story collection by Cory Doctorow. This Wednesday is, I think, Valentine's Day. I want to do something goofy for that. I might only do that as the lead-in. I'll do something goofy as the lead-in. I won't do anything crazy. I won't do the whole stream as, romance-related stuff, probably. But I do have one short story I want to read that's cute and suitably thematic, which I will not reveal until we're there. I haven't decided if I'm going to continue with the next story along called Model Minority in this radicalized short story collection, or if I want to do a follow-up to the first story using some real-world events that mesh in pretty well with the previous tale, which is called Unauthorized Bread. And Fridays are Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. That's where I have a bit more planning involved. Right now we're reading through the Hyperion Cantos by Dan Simmons. If you want a roaring literary space opera adventure, this is the one. I highly recommend checking out at least the book. Whether I'm doing it justice or not is anybody's guess. I like to think I'm doing good. People seem to be liking it. I don't know. I'm reasonably proud with how I'm handling it, and that's
usually a good sign. Unlike my reading of The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, which I adore as a book, but is insanely hard to read aloud because of the way it's written. Anyway, with that, I'm going to go. So Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays, starting at 12 noon. I do it live. So if you want to tune in live, you can. Otherwise, I'm perfectly happy to have you just listen to them after the fact. It's easier that way. It's easier for everyone that way. But yeah, they're all on my YouTube channel. I usually update the playlists at least once a month, usually at the end of the month or beginning of the next month. So if it seems like it's behind, that's why. They're all there. You just have to go through live and search for them, and it's a pain in the ass. Until I put them in playlists, which makes it much easier. So with that, I'm going to run. Thanks again to everybody tuning in. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. And have a good one. See you all later. Bye-bye.